Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Shadow Operator. Staff Sergeant Jake Walker moved through the compound like death itself, his footsteps silent despite the rocky terrain of eastern Afghanistan. At 34, he was the Army's most feared interrogator, a man who could break enemy combatants without leaving a mark, who could extract information from stone-cold terrorists using nothing but psychological warfare and an intimate understanding of human fear. His teammates called him the Shadow because enemies seemed to simply disappear when Jake was assigned to their cases. What they didn't know was that Jake's methods went far beyond the approved handbook. He was a master of psychological manipulation, capable of destroying a person's mind while keeping them physically intact. Jake's phone buzzed with a video message from his wife, Marissa Walker. They'd been married 8 years, and she was supposed to be taking care of their 6-year-old son, Wesley, while Jake completed his 3rd deployment. Jake had met Marissa when she was a cocktail waitress in a dive bar near Fort Bragg, a beautiful blonde with sad eyes and daddy issues that Jake thought he could fix. He opened the video, expecting to see Wesley's gap-toothed smile, or maybe Marissa complaining about the leaky faucet again. Instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. The camera was positioned in their living room, showing his uncle Herman Newman, his father's younger brother, striking Wesley across the face. The boy fell backward, tears streaming down his cheeks. "This is what happens when soldiers aren't home to protect their kids." Herman's voice came through the speaker, cold and mocking. Wesley sobbed, looking directly at the camera. "Please stop, Uncle Herman. My dad will come for you when he gets home." Herman laughed, a sound that would haunt Jake's dreams. "That weakling? I'm not scared of your daddy, boy. Jake's just a paper pusher who probably cleans boots for real soldiers." Then came Marissa's voice from behind the camera, and Jake's world shattered completely. "He's just a mechanic who only cleans military tires, Herman. He's not scary like you." The video ended with Herman roughly grabbing Wesley by the arm and dragging him off camera while the boy screamed for his father. Jake stared at the black screen for a full minute, his mind processing what he'd just witnessed. His wife, the woman he'd married, provided for, protected, was not only allowing another man to abuse their son, but was actively participating in humiliating Jake himself. They thought he was just a mechanic. They had no idea that Jake Walker was Special Forces' deadliest interrogator, a man who had broken war criminals and extracted state secrets from enemy operatives. They didn't know that he specialized in psychological warfare, that he could destroy lives with surgical precision. Jake's commanding officer, Colonel Blake Turner, found him 20 minutes later, still staring at his phone. "Walker, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Colonel, I need emergency leave. Family crisis." Blake studied Jake's face. The man looked like a predator who just caught scent of prey. "How long?" "However long it takes to handle some unfinished business." Chapter 2. The Uncle's Web. Jake's flight touched down at Fort Bragg 18 hours later. He'd spent the entire journey researching, planning, and preparing for what was to come. His military training had taught him that intelligence gathering was the foundation of any successful operation. Herman Newman, 42 years old, lived in a rundown apartment complex 15 minutes from Jake's house. He worked as a freelance contractor, mostly doing under-the-table construction jobs. More importantly, Herman had a gambling problem and owed money to some very dangerous people. Jake's first stop wasn't his house. It was Herman's apartment building. He needed to understand the battlefield before engaging the enemy. The Sunset Manor apartments were exactly what Jake expected. Cracked parking lot, broken playground equipment, and the kind of residents who minded their own business. Perfect for what he had planned. Jake positioned himself across the street with a clear view of Herman's ground floor apartment. Within 2 hours, he had his answers. Herman was dealing drugs from his apartment. Small-time stuff, but enough to bring serious legal trouble. More interesting was the parade of visitors. A young woman who stayed for exactly 30 minutes. A nervous man who looked over his shoulder constantly. And most telling of all, 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they belonged to someone Herman owed money to. But the real intelligence came when Jake hacked into Herman's phone using techniques he'd learned in intelligence school. The text messages painted a clear picture. Herman had been planning this humiliation for months. He'd been grooming Marissa, telling her that Jake was just a grease monkey and that she deserved better. More sickening were the photos Herman had been sending. Pictures of Wesley crying, with captions like, "Training the boy to be a real man." The final piece of intelligence made Jake's blood boil. Herman had been recording videos of abusing Wesley for weeks, building a collection that he sent to other sick individuals online. His nephew wasn't just a victim of physical abuse. He was being exploited for an audience of predators. Jake sat in his rental car as darkness fell, watching Herman's apartment. The old Jake, the mechanic his wife thought she'd married, would have called the police, maybe confronted Herman directly, tried to work within the system. But Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, had different plans. He was going to dismantle Herman Newman piece by piece, starting with his mind and working down to his bones. At 11 p.m., Jake made his move. He'd studied the building's layout, identified the security camera blind spots, and memorized Herman's routine. Getting into the apartment was child's play. Jake had infiltrated enemy strongholds in 3 different countries. Herman was passed out on his couch, empty beer bottles scattered around him, when Jake appeared in his living room like a specter. Jake didn't wake him immediately. Instead, he explored the apartment, gathering evidence and understanding Herman's life. The computer was password protected, but Jake had it cracked in minutes. What he found made him sick. Dozens of videos of Wesley, communication with other predators, and a detailed plan to break the boy properly when Jake was deployed longer. When Herman finally stirred awake, Jake was sitting in a chair directly across from him, perfectly still in the darkness. "Who the hell?" Herman started. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw Jake's face. "Jesus Christ, Jake? What are you doing here?" "Hello, Herman. We need to talk." Chapter 3, The Wife's Betrayal. Herman tried to stand, but Jake hadn't moved from his chair. There was something in his nephew's stillness that was more terrifying than any threat. "Look, Jake, I can explain." "Sit down, Herman." The command was quiet, but Herman found himself sitting immediately. Jake's voice carried an authority that Herman had never heard before. This wasn't the awkward young man who'd married into their family. "I saw the video you sent me," Jake continued, his voice conversational. "You and Marissa had quite the performance planned out." "It wasn't. You were just what?" "Beating my 6-year-old son while my wife filmed it for my entertainment." Jake leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Herman, what did you think would happen when I came home?" Herman's mouth went dry. Something in Jake's eyes looked empty. "Predatory. I thought you were just a mechanic." "Yes, I heard that part. It's fascinating how people make assumptions." Jake stood up slowly, and Herman pressed himself back into the couch. "Do you know what I actually do in the Army, Herman?" You fix trucks?" Jake smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I break people, Herman. Not their bones, though I could do that too. I break their minds. I take enemy combatants, men who would die before betraying their cause, and I turn them into sobbing children who tell me everything I want to know." Herman tried to swallow, but his throat had gone completely dry. "And the beautiful thing about my job," Jake continued, "is that I've become very, very good at it. So good that my commanding officers give me the cases they can't solve through conventional means." Jake walked to Herman's computer and turned the screen toward him. Herman's face went white as he saw his own files displayed. All the videos, all the communications with other predators, everything. "Here's what's going to happen, Herman. You're going to tell me exactly how long you've been planning this with my wife. You're going to tell me about every time you've hurt my son. And you're going to tell me what Marissa knew and when she knew it." "Jake, I can't." "Oh, but you can. Because the alternative is that I make one phone call to Detective Larry Knight at the county sheriff's office. We served together in Iraq, and suddenly your computer gets anonymously tipped to the FBI. How long do you think a man like you lasts in federal prison, Herman?" Herman's hands were shaking now. "You don't understand. Marissa, she wanted this. She said you were weak, that Wesley needed a stronger male figure." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. "Continue." "She's been We've been together for 2 years, Jake. Since your last deployment. She said you weren't man enough for her, that you were just some nobody who pretended to be a soldier. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Jake spoke again, his voice eerily calm. 2 years. And my son, she said he needed discipline. Real discipline. Said you were too soft on him. Jake processed this information with the same clinical detachment he used when interrogating enemy combatants. His wife hadn't just betrayed him. She'd actively participated in his son's abuse for 2 years. She'd chosen Herman over her own child's safety. Where is Marissa now? At your house. She's waiting for me to come over after you get back tomorrow. Interesting. She doesn't know I'm here early. Herman nodded miserably. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. You know, Herman, in my line of work, we have a saying, the best revenge is the kind your enemy designs for themselves. You and Marissa have been so helpful in that regard. What do you mean? Jake turned back to him, and Herman saw something in his expression that made him want to run. You're going to help me give my wife exactly what she deserves. And Herman, by the time I'm done with both of you, you're going to wish I really was just a mechanic. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Gambit. Jake left Herman's apartment at 3 a.m. with a detailed confession recorded on his phone and a man so terrified he would do anything Jake asked. But Jake wasn't done gathering intelligence. He needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before he could design the perfect revenge. His next stop was a surprise visit to his neighbor, Mrs. Celeste Richardson, an elderly widow who lived across the street and had always been fond of Wesley. Jake had helped her with yard work before his deployments, and he knew she kept close tabs on the neighborhood. Jake, my goodness, you're home early, Celeste said when she answered her door at 6 a.m. She was already dressed and making coffee. Early riser, as Jake remembered. Emergency leave, Mrs. Richardson. Family situation. I was hoping you might help me understand what's been going on while I was away. Celeste's expression darkened. Oh, honey, I was wondering when someone was going to ask. Come in. Let me pour you some coffee. Over the next hour, Jake learned that his nightmare was even worse than he'd imagined. Celeste had witnessed Herman's truck in his driveway at least 3 nights a week. She'd heard Wesley crying through the windows on multiple occasions. Most damning of all, she'd seen Marissa and Herman together at the local grocery store, acting like a couple, while Wesley walked behind them with visible bruises. I called Child Protective Services twice, Celeste admitted, tears in her eyes. But Marissa always cleaned Wesley up before they came by. And that boy is so scared he won't tell anyone what's happening. Why didn't you call me? I tried, dear. I called the number you left, but Marissa said you were on a classified mission and couldn't be contacted. She said she'd pass along my concerns. Jake felt his jaw clench. Marissa had been intercepting communication, isolating him from anyone who might have warned him. Mrs. Richardson, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do might get very complicated, and you might see things that seem concerning. But I need you to trust that I'm handling this situation. Celeste studied his face. She'd been married to a Vietnam veteran for 40 years before he passed. She recognized the look of a soldier preparing for war. That boy is lucky to have you as a father, she said simply. You do what you need to do. Jake's final stop before confronting Marissa was the bank. He needed to understand their financial situation and what assets Marissa might have access to. What he discovered made him smile grimly. Marissa had been systematically draining their joint savings account, transferring money to an account in her name only. She'd also taken out a credit card in Jake's name and maxed it out on purchases that clearly weren't for household necessities. She wasn't just betraying him emotionally. She was stealing from him and preparing to leave him financially destroyed. By 10 a.m., Jake was parked outside his own house, watching through the windows. Wesley was at school, and Marissa was alone. She was on the phone, laughing about something, gesturing animatedly. Jake activated the audio surveillance app he'd installed on her phone months ago, a precaution he'd learned to take with all family members of deployed soldiers. Can't wait until he gets back tomorrow, Marissa was saying. Herman, you should see his face when he watches that video. He's going to be so broken. What if he tries to fight me? Came Herman's voice through the speaker. Baby, you could take Jake with one hand tied behind your back. He's never been in a real fight in his life. The army just has him changing oil filters and rotating tires. Jake turned off the recording and sat back in his car. They thought tomorrow's homecoming was going to be their victory celebration. They had no idea that Jake had been home for hours, that he'd already dismantled Herman's life, and that he was about to introduce them both to the real Jake Walker. He checked his watch. Wesley would be home from school in 6 hours. Jake needed to have the first phase of his operation completed by then. He refused to expose his son to any more trauma. Jake walked up to his own front door and used his key. Marissa was in the kitchen, her back to him, still on the phone with Herman. "I'm telling you, he'll probably cry when he sees what we—" She turned around and screamed. Jake was standing in the doorway, still in his military fatigues, his duffel bag over his shoulder, looking exactly like the husband returning from deployment, except for his eyes, which held a coldness that made Marissa drop her phone. "Hello, honey," Jake said quietly. "I'm home." Chapter 5. The Trap Titans. Marissa's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, fear, guilt, then a desperate attempt at normalcy. "Jake, oh my God, you scared me. I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow." She rushed toward him, arms outstretched for a hug. Jake caught her wrists before she could embrace him. Surprise. Marissa tried to smile, but something in Jake's grip and his tone made her nervous. "How long have you been home?" "Long enough." Jake released her wrists and walked into his own living room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. "Nice setup you have here. Very comfortable." "What do you mean?" Jake turned to face his wife, really looked at her. She was wearing new clothes, expensive ones. Her hair was professionally styled. Her nails were perfectly manicured, all paid for with money she'd stolen from their joint account. "I mean, this whole arrangement you and Herman have worked out. Very cozy." Marissa's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jake pulled out his phone and played the video Herman had sent him. Marissa watched herself mock Jake while Herman abused their son, and with each second, she seemed to shrink. "Want to try that again?" Jake asked when the video ended. Marissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Jake, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can. But first, let me explain something to you." Jake sat down in his favorite chair, the one he'd bought when they first moved in together, back when he thought they were building a life together. "You see, Marissa, you've made a critical error in judgment." "What error?" "You assumed you knew who I was, what I was capable of." Jake's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "It's a common mistake. People see what they want to see." Marissa backed toward the kitchen, but Jake made no move to follow her. His stillness was somehow more threatening than if he'd been yelling. "You thought I was weak," Jake continued. "A mechanic. Someone who cleans tires for real soldiers. Someone who couldn't protect his own family." "Jake, please." "But here's the thing about assumptions, Marissa. They can be very dangerous when you're wrong." Jake leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what I actually do in the army?" Marissa shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I break people, Marissa. It's my specialty. I take the strongest, most committed enemies of our country, and I turn them into sobbing, broken shells who tell me everything I want to know. And I do it without leaving a mark." The kitchen phone rang. Jake looked at the caller ID and smiled. "That would be Herman. He's probably wondering why you screamed and then went silent." "Answer it." "Jake, I can't." "Answer the phone." The command carried an authority that made Marissa move before she consciously decided to. She picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Hello, Marissa? What happened? I heard you scream, and then the line went dead." Jake walked over to his wife and held out his hand for the phone. Marissa looked at him pleadingly, but the expression on his face left no room for argument. She handed him the phone. "Hello, Herman." Dead silence on the other end. "I think you and I need to have another conversation. Why don't you come over? Marissa and I were just discussing your relationship." "Jake, I don't think." "Herman." Jake's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "You have 10 minutes to get here, or I start making phone calls. To the police. To your landlord. To the people you owe money to. Your choice." The line went dead. Jake hung up the phone and turned back to Marissa, who was now openly crying. "Now, while we wait for Herman, why don't you tell me about the money you've been stealing from our account?" Chapter 6. The Confrontation. Herman arrived in 8 minutes, which told Jake everything he needed to know about how terrified his uncle had become. Jake watched through the window as Herman sat in his truck for a full minute, gathering courage before finally walking to the door. Jake answered before Herman could knock. Right on time. Come in, Herman. Marissa was just about to explain how long you two have been planning this. Herman stepped into the house like a man walking to his execution. Marissa was sitting on the couch, tissues in her hands, makeup smeared from crying. Sit down, Herman, Jake said, gesturing to the chair across from Marissa. We're having a family meeting. Herman sat, his eyes darting between Jake and Marissa. Jake remained standing, positioned where he could watch both of them. Now, Jake began, I've heard Herman's version of events. About how this started 2 years ago. About how you, Marissa, decided that our son needed real discipline. About how you've been stealing money from our account and planning to leave me financially destroyed. But I want to hear it from you. Marissa looked at Herman, who avoided her eyes. Jake, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You thought you'd married a weak man who would never fight back. You thought you could humiliate me, abuse my son, steal my money, and I just take it because I was too pathetic to stop you. That's not. But you made one critical mistake. Jake walked to the mantel where he kept his military commendations, awards Marissa had never bothered to read. You never actually looked at who you married. He picked up a framed certificate, Purple Heart, for wounds received in enemy action in Afghanistan. He set it down and picked up another, Bronze Star with Valor Device, for heroic achievement in ground combat against an armed enemy. Herman was staring at the certificates like he'd never seen them before. Jake picked up a third frame. This one's my favorite. Army Commendation Medal for my work in intelligence operations, specifically for developing new interrogation techniques that were adopted service-wide. Marissa's face had gone completely white. You see, Herman, when you call me a weakling who cleans tires, you were insulting a man who has personally interrogated over 200 enemy combatants. A man who specializes in psychological warfare. A man who can destroy lives without ever throwing a punch. Jake sat down across for both of them. And now you've given me a reason to use those skills on you. What do you want? Herman asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jake smiled, the same cold smile he'd used on enemy prisoners. I want justice. And fortunately, you're both going to help me get it. Ow! Simple. You're both going to confess. Everything. The abuse, the affair, the financial theft, all of it. You're going to do it on camera, with full detail, and you're going to sign written statements. And if we don't? Marissa asked. Jake pulled out his phone and showed them a video. It was Herman's apartment building, with a clear timestamp from earlier that morning. This is federal agents executing a search warrant on Herman's apartment. They're going to find some very interesting things on his computer. Herman went pale. You didn't. Oh, but I did. You see, Herman, when you make enemies with someone in intelligence operations, you don't get to keep secrets. Jake turned to Marissa. And as for you, darling wife, I've already frozen our joint accounts and filed fraud reports on the credit card you opened in my name. The bank is very interested in talking to you. Both of them stared at him in horror. But here's the beautiful part, Jake continued. If you cooperate fully, confess everything, sign the documents, and do exactly what I tell you, I might be persuaded to show mercy. What kind of mercy? Marissa asked desperately. Jake's smile widened. The kind where you get to discover exactly how creative a professional interrogator can be when someone hurts his child. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. 3 hours later, Jake had detailed written confessions from both Herman and Marissa, along with video recordings of them admitting to everything. Herman had confessed to 2 years of systematic child abuse, creating and distributing illicit content featuring Wesley, and planning to escalate the abuse. Marissa had admitted to the affair, financial theft, and actively participating in Jake's humiliation and their son's abuse. But Jake wasn't finished. Confessions were just the beginning. Now comes the interesting part, Jake told them as he reviewed the documents. You see, I could turn these over to the authorities right now. Herman would be looking at federal charges for the content on his computer, plus child abuse charges. Marissa would face fraud charges, child endangerment, and conspiracy charges. Please, Jake, Marissa sobbed. I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Oh, you're definitely going to disappear, Marissa. But not the way you think. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Wesley's school bus would arrive in 30 minutes. Here's what's going to happen. Herman, you're going to pack your things and leave town. Tonight, you're going to drive to Miami, check into a specific hotel, and wait for my instructions. What instructions? The kind that keep you out of federal prison. You see, Herman, I have friends in very interesting places. Some of them work in law enforcement. Others work in less official capacities. The choice of which friends I introduce you to depends entirely on how well you follow directions. Herman nodded frantically. Jake turned to Marissa. As for you, my dear wife, you're going to pack Wesley's things and yours. Just the essentials. Then you're going to take him to your sister's house in Charlotte. Why? Because what happens next isn't something a child should witness. Jake's voice carried a finality that made both of them shiver. You're going to tell your sister that we're getting divorced, that you made some mistakes, and that you need a place to stay while the lawyers sort things out. Jake, please, we can work this out. Marissa. Jake's voice cut through her pleading like a blade. There is no working this out. There is no reconciliation. There is no forgiveness. You chose to hurt my child and humiliate me. Now you get to live with the consequences. Marissa tried one more time. What about Wesley? He needs his mother. Jake walked over to her, close enough that she could see the cold fury in his eyes. Wesley needs to be protected from his mother. The woman who allowed her lover to abuse him for 2 years. The woman who filmed his humiliation for her own amusement. I love my son. No, you don't. If you loved him, you would have protected him. Instead, you sacrificed him for your own gratification. Jake stepped back. Pack his things. Now, he's never coming back to this house while you're in it. The school bus pulled up outside as Marissa was packing Wesley's clothes with shaking hands. Jake watched his son get off the bus, backpack over his shoulders, walking slowly toward the house like a boy who was afraid of what waited for him at home. Jake met him at the door. Daddy. Wesley's face lit up with joy and relief. You're home early. Jake knelt down and hugged his son, really hugged him for the first time in months. He could feel how thin the boy had gotten, could see the faint bruises that makeup couldn't completely hide. Hey, buddy, I missed you so much. Are you staying home now? Please say you're staying home. I'm staying home, Wesley, and we're going to take a trip to see Aunt January. Would you like that? Wesley nodded eagerly. Will Uncle Herman be there? Jake felt something cold and vicious settle in his chest. No, buddy. Uncle Herman won't be bothering us anymore. As Jake helped Wesley pack his favorite toys, he made a silent promise. Herman and Marissa had thought they were destroying a weak man who wouldn't fight back. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A father who would stop at nothing to protect his child, and a soldier trained to destroy his enemies with methodical precision. The real reckoning was just beginning. Chapter 8. The Hunter's Web. After Wesley and Marissa left for Charlotte, with Jake following at a distance to ensure they actually went there, Jake returned to his house to begin Phase 2 of his operation. He had 48 hours before anyone would expect to hear from him, and he intended to use every minute. Jake's first call was to Detective Larry Knight, his old Army buddy who now worked with the county sheriff's department. Jake Walker, heard you were still overseas. What's going on? Larry, I need a favor. Hypothetically speaking, if someone had evidence of systematic child abuse and financial fraud, but wanted to handle things privately before involving law enforcement, how would you recommend they proceed? There was a pause. Larry had known Jake for 10 years. They'd served 2 tours together in Iraq. Jake, is everything okay? Define okay. Jesus Christ. How bad is it? Jake told him everything. The video, the confessions, the evidence he'd gathered. When he finished, Larry was quiet for a long moment. Jake, normally I'd tell you to bring this evidence in immediately. But given what these people did to your boy. Larry paused. How much time do you need? 72 hours. You've got it. But Jake, whatever you're planning, make sure you can live with it. Oh, I can definitely live with it, Larry. The question is whether they can. Jake's second call was to his old unit commander, Colonel Blake Turner. Walker, you just left 24 hours ago. Please tell me you're not calling to extend your leave. Actually, Sir, I'm calling to request a transfer. Stateside assignment. My family situation has become complicated. Blake was quiet for a moment. How complicated? Jake gave him a sanitized version of events. When he finished, Blake's voice had turned ice cold. Jake, you know I have connections at CID. I could have investigators on this within hours. I appreciate that, sir, but I prefer to handle this through civilian channels. Understood. Consider your transfer approved. And Jake, if you need any resources for handling your family situation, you know how to reach me. The third call was the most important. Jake dialed a number he'd memorized but never thought he'd use. Rodriguez Investigation Services. Jimmy, it's Jake Walker. Jimmy Rodriguez had been Jake's partner in intelligence operations for 3 years before leaving the Army to start a private investigation firm that specialized in discrete problem resolution for military families and government contractors. Jake, man, I thought you were still downrange. What's going on? Jake explained the situation. Jimmy listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Jesus, Jake, these people really picked the wrong family to mess with. Jimmy paused. What do you need? Everything. Full backgrounds on both targets. Financial records, employment history, criminal history, family connections, debts, secrets. I want to know every pressure point they have. How deep do you want me to go? All the way down. And, Jimmy, I need it fast. Give me 12 hours. I'll have a complete dossier on both of them. Jake's final call was to Marissa's sister, Jan Kellogg, in Charlotte. Jake, Marissa just got here with Wesley. She said you two are having some problems. Jan, I need you to keep Wesley with you for a while. Things are complicated right now. Of course. But Jake, Marissa seems really upset. She's not telling me much, just that you found out about some mistakes she made. That's a generous way to put it. Jan, I need you to understand something. Wesley has been hurt. Badly. I'm handling the situation, but he needs to be somewhere safe while I do. Jan's voice became serious. Hurt how? I can't get into details over the phone. But Jan, don't let Marissa take him anywhere without calling me first. And if she tries to leave with him, call the police immediately. Jake, you're scaring me. Good. Being scared will keep Wesley safe. After hanging up, Jake sat in his quiet house and reviewed his situation. Herman was driving to Miami, terrified and completely under Jake's control. Marissa was in Charlotte, isolated from her support network and under surveillance by her sister. Wesley was safe and protected. Now came the fun part. Jake opened his laptop and began researching. By morning, he would know everything about Herman and Marissa's lives, their fears, their weaknesses, their pressure points. And then he would begin systematically dismantling everything they cared about. They had made the mistake of thinking Jake Walker was weak. He was about to show them what strength actually looked like. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. 72 hours later, Jake Walker had orchestrated the complete destruction of both Herman Newman and Marissa Walker without throwing a single punch or breaking a single law. Jimmy Rodriguez had delivered intelligence beyond Jake's expectations. Herman, it turned out, owed $43,000 to a loan shark named Ricardo Hobbs, who was known for creative debt collection methods. Marissa had been having not one affair, but 3. Herman was just the most recent. More importantly, she had been stealing money not just from Jake, but from her previous workplace, building up a pattern of financial fraud that went back years. Jake's revenge was surgical in its precision. For Herman, Jake had simply expedited the natural consequences of his choices. A single anonymous phone call to Ricardo Hobbs, informing him that Herman had been bragging about having money to pay his debts, but was hiding it in a Miami hotel, had resolved the Herman problem permanently. The last Jake heard, Herman had checked himself into protective custody with the Miami police, begging for protection from unknown assailants. The federal charges for the content found on Herman's computer would ensure he never threatened another child. But more importantly, Ricardo's people would ensure Herman spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, never knowing when his past would catch up with him. For Marissa, Jake's revenge was more complex. He had systematically contacted every person in her life, her employers, her friends, her family, and provided them with evidence of her true character. Not accusations or hearsay, but documented proof. The video of her mocking Jake while her son was abused, bank records showing her theft, communications with multiple affair partners. Marissa's carefully constructed image as a devoted military wife and loving mother crumbled in 48 hours. Her employer fired her for theft. Her friends abandoned her. Even her own family, after seeing the evidence of how she treated Wesley, turned their backs on her. But Jake's masterpiece was the custody hearing. He had filed for emergency custody of Wesley, backed by video evidence, written confessions, medical records documenting Wesley's injuries, and testimony from Mrs. Richardson and other neighbors. Marissa's lawyer, a public defender, since all her stolen money had been frozen by the courts, had no defense against the mountain of evidence Jake presented. The judge had taken 15 minutes to grant Jake full custody and issue a restraining order prohibiting Marissa from contacting Wesley without supervised visitation. Jake stood in the courtroom watching Marissa cry as her lawyer explained that she would be lucky to see her son once a month and only under court supervision. She looked across the courtroom at Jake, searching his face for any sign of the man she thought she'd married. The weak, forgiving fool who would take her back if she just apologized enough. Instead, she saw Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, looking at her with the same clinical detachment he'd shown enemy combatants. There was no anger in his expression, no satisfaction, just the cold assessment of a mission completed successfully. "Jake," she mouthed across the courtroom. "Please." Jake turned away without acknowledging her. 3 months later, Jake was sitting on his porch watching Wesley play in the backyard. The boy was laughing, actually laughing, for the first time since Jake had come home. The bruises had faded, the nightmares were becoming less frequent, and Wesley was beginning to believe that he was safe. Mrs. Richardson walked over from her yard, carrying a glass of lemonade. "That boy's lucky to have you," she said, settling into the chair next to Jake. "I'm the lucky one. Have you heard from Marissa?" Jake shook his head. "Last I heard, she was living in her car in Raleigh. Seems she's having trouble finding anyone willing to help her out. And Herman, still in protective custody in Miami. Apparently, he's developed a very serious phobia about being alone." Mrs. Richardson studied Jake's profile. "Do you ever regret it? What you did to them?" Jake watched Wesley climb his swing set. The same swing set where Herman had once forced the boy to apologize for disrespecting him. Now, Wesley climbed it fearlessly, knowing his father was watching, knowing he was protected. "Mrs. Richardson, I spent years in enemy territory, hunting down people who hurt innocent civilians. I never thought I'd have to use those skills on my own family." Jake turned to look at her. "But regret destroying the people who abused my son? Not for a second." Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Colonel Turner. "Jake, how's civilian life treating you?" Jake typed back, "Better than expected, sir. Turns out some missions are worth coming home for." As the sun set over his backyard, Jake Walker, former Special Forces interrogator, current single father, and permanently reformed believer in the power of underestimating the quiet ones, watched his son play and made himself a promise. Wesley would never have to be afraid again, and anyone who tried to hurt him would discover what Jake had taught Herman and Marissa, that the most dangerous enemy is the one you mistake for prey. Some people, Jake had learned, confused quiet strength with weakness. Those people discovered their mistake exactly once. Jake had spent his career protecting innocent people from monsters. He just never expected to find the worst monsters in his own home. But he'd handled them the same way he'd handled every other threat to innocent life, with methodical precision, overwhelming force, and absolutely no mercy. Wesley called out from the swing set, "Daddy, watch me go really high." Jake smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine, nothing like the cold expression his enemies had learned to fear. "I'm watching, buddy. I'm always watching." And in a house across town, where Marissa was spending another night alone, wondering how the weak man she'd married had destroyed her entire life so completely, those words would have sent a chill down her spine. Because Jake Walker was always watching, always protecting, and never, ever forgiving those who threatened his family. The quiet ones, as Herman and Marissa had learned too late, were the most dangerous of all. And there you have it, another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello, and welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're grateful for each view and comment. Tell us, from which country or city are you watching today? We enjoy connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. Theo Blackwell stood at the glass wall of his home office, overlooking the sprawling estate he'd built from nothing. At 43, he'd transformed from a scrappy street kid to the owner of the most successful private security firm in the state. His hands, once calloused from street fights, now bore only the faint scars of his past, reminders of how far he'd come. The evening sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn as he swirled 18-year-old scotch in a crystal tumbler. 10 years of marriage to Vanessa had given him stability, but lately, something felt off. Little things, late nights at her gallery, mysterious phone calls, and her growing distance, needled his instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive in his youth. Working late again, Vanessa's voice came from behind him. She'd entered silently, a habit he once found endearing but now struck him as calculated. "Just finishing up," Theo replied, turning to face his wife. Vanessa Blackwell, with her honey-blonde hair and emerald eyes, still possessed the beauty that had captured him a decade ago. Her family, old money with political connections, had initially opposed their marriage. Only her cousin, Ray Palmer, had welcomed Theo, becoming his closest friend. Ray called. Vanessa said, her perfectly manicured fingers toying with her pendant, a nervous tell he'd cataloged years ago. "He's coming by tomorrow. Something about investment opportunities." Theo nodded, filing away the slight tremor in her voice. Looking forward to it. That night, lying beside Vanessa, Theo reviewed the inconsistencies of the past months. His military background and years building a security empire had taught him to identify patterns. Something was happening in his own home, and his security specialist, Miguel Ortiz, had reluctantly confirmed his suspicions earlier that week. "I found something, boss," Miguel had said, his loyalty to Theo outweighing any discomfort. "Your home security system has been accessed remotely several times. Someone's been disabling the cameras periodically." "Who?" "The access comes from within your network. Someone with your passwords." Theo had thanked Miguel without revealing his growing certainty about who was betraying him. Tomorrow, he'd confront Ray, the man he once considered a brother, the only person besides Vanessa with full access to his home systems. What he didn't expect was that Ray would make the first move. Chapter 2. The Unwelcome Visitors. The doorbell's chime pulled Theo from restless sleep. Vanessa's side of the bed was empty, unusual for 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Grabbing his phone, he noticed the security app was offline. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Descending the stairs in his pajamas, he caught a glimpse of himself in the hallway mirror, a tall, broad-shouldered man with penetrating gray eyes and a face that rarely revealed his thoughts. He learned long ago that showing emotion was a weakness. Theo answered the door to find 2 police officers standing on his porch. Officer Bennett, a square-jawed woman with cropped hair, and Officer Donovan, a younger man whose hand rested too close to his holster. "Mr. Blackwell?" Bennett asked. "We received a concerning call from your wife." Before Theo could respond, a third figure stepped out from behind them. Ray Palmer, his perfectly tailored suit at odds with the early hour, his usually friendly face twisted into something ugly. "You weren't supposed to find out about us." Ray smirked, the familiarity in his voice when saying us confirming Theo's suspicions. "Now we have to handle this differently." The realization hit Theo like a physical blow. His wife and his best friend. The betrayal was both exactly what he'd suspected and somehow still shocking in its audacity. Handle what differently? Theo's voice remained steady even as his mind cataloged escape routes, weapons within reach, and the strange absence of official procedure in this police visit. Officer Bennett glanced uncomfortably at Ray before speaking. Your wife has filed a restraining order claiming threatening behavior. We need you to come with us. She's claiming I threatened her? Theo noticed Bennett's badge number was obscured and Donovan's name tag was missing entirely. Something was very wrong. We have evidence, Ray said smugly, pulling out his phone. Vanessa's been recording your outbursts for months. The phone played audio of Theo's voice threatening violence. Expertly spliced together from security lectures he'd given at conferences, his words twisted into something sinister. That's doctored, Theo said, but the officers were already moving toward him. We need you to come to the station, Bennett insisted, revealing handcuffs. In that moment, Theo saw the full picture. Ray's political connections, the false police, the fabricated evidence. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated takedown. I need to get dressed, Theo said, stepping back into the house. I'll accompany you, Donovan said, following him inside. In his bedroom, with Donovan watching, Theo dressed methodically while activating the emergency protocol on his smartwatch. 3 taps for a silent alert to Miguel. Whatever game Ray was playing, it had just begun. Chapter 3, 48 Hours of Hell. The police station turned out to be an abandoned warehouse 30 miles outside the city. As the fake police car pulled up to the decrepit building, Theo's training kicked in. He'd been calculating distances, memorizing turns, and assessing his captors since they'd left his home. Inside, Ray waited with 2 more men, professional muscle by their stance and vigilant eyes. The warehouse interior had been arranged with a makeshift cell, surveillance equipment, and what appeared to be a video recording setup. Welcome to your temporary accommodations, Ray said, motioning to the cell. You'll be making a video confession admitting to financial crimes, domestic abuse, and transferring your company to me as restitution. Theo stared at him, his expression revealing nothing. And if I refuse? Ray smiled. Then this becomes unpleasant for everyone, especially Vanessa. She may be leaving you for me, but I'd rather not hurt her. The threat against Vanessa, despite her betrayal, sparked something primal in Theo. He allowed himself to be locked in the cell, biding his time. For 48 hours, they worked on breaking him, sleep deprivation, limited water, psychological tactics. Ray regularly video called Vanessa, showing her Theo's cooperation, while secretly threatening her if she backed out of their plan. What Ray didn't know was that Theo had activated more than an alert to Miguel. His watch contained a tracking device, and his security team had been monitoring his location since his abduction. More importantly, Ray had no idea of the contingency plans Theo had established years ago for exactly this type of situation. On the second night, as exhaustion began to dull his captor's vigilance, Theo heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Moments later, the warehouse was plunged into darkness as the power was cut. The rescue was swift and professional. Miguel led a team of Theo's security specialists, all former military, through the warehouse with precision. When the lights came back on, Ray and his accomplices were zip-tied on the floor, and Theo was being checked by a medic. "Boss, we've got a problem," Miguel said, his expression grim. "We've been monitoring your home security remotely. Mrs. Blackwell packed bags and left with an unknown man 2 hours ago. They headed to the airport." Theo nodded, processing this information. "Any communication from her?" "None." Miguel hesitated. "But there's something else. We intercepted some encrypted communications between Ray and someone using the handle Artemis. They mentioned something called Protocol Widowmaker scheduled to activate if Ray doesn't check in by morning." Theo's blood ran cold. He knew Artemis was Vanessa's college nickname. Whatever she and Ray had planned, it wasn't over. Just as Miguel finished speaking, his phone rang. The local police, the real police, had found an abandoned car registered to Vanessa at the airport parking garage. Inside was a handwritten note addressed to Theo. "By the time you read this, it will be too late. I'm sorry it came to this." As dawn broke on the 3rd day, Theo's phone rang with an international number. The voice on the other end was formal, clinical. "Mr. Blackwell, this is the American Embassy in Zurich. I regret to inform you there's been an incident involving your wife. I'm afraid the news is grave. She's no more." Chapter 4, Ashes and Lies. She's no more on American soil, Mr. Blackwell, the embassy official continued. Mrs. Blackwell entered Switzerland 6 hours ago under a different name, but our facial recognition flagged her. We're calling because her entry triggered a security alert in our system, apparently placed by your company last year. Theo sat in his home office, the morning sun illuminating the evidence wall he'd created. Photos, documents, and timeline charts covered the surface. 3 days had passed since his rescue and Vanessa's disappearance. What name is she using? Theo asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Diana Keller. She's traveling with a man identified as Paul Mercer. Theo thanked the official and ended the call. Paul Mercer, a name Theo recognized from Vanessa's gallery connections. Not Ray, which meant there were more players in this game than he'd initially thought. Miguel entered with a folder. The forensic team finished analyzing Ray's devices. You were right. This goes beyond an affair. The folder contained evidence of an elaborate scheme spanning 2 years. Ray and Vanessa had been systematically gathering information on Theo's business operations, client lists, and security protocols. They'd been planning to strip him of everything, his company, his assets, even his reputation, using fabricated evidence of criminal activity. There's more, Miguel said hesitantly. We found references to a life insurance policy Vanessa took out on you 6 months ago. $10 million. Double indemnity for accidental death. Theo absorbed this information with cold calculation. The woman he'd trusted with his life had been plotting his death. What about the house in Vermont? Theo asked. Miguel looked surprised. How did you know about that? Vanessa has been checking real estate listings on our shared computer. Careless. Theo's expression hardened. I need everything on Paul Mercer, and I want to know what's in that house. 3 hours later, Theo had his answer. The Vermont property, purchased through a shell company linked to Mercer, contained a fully equipped identity forging operation. Vanessa and her accomplices had been planning this for far longer than he'd suspected. Boss, Miguel interrupted his thoughts. Ray's asking to see you. Says he has information you need. In the basement security room, Ray sat handcuffed to a metal table. His once immaculate appearance was disheveled, his confident smirk replaced by desperate fear. She played us both, Ray blurted as Theo entered. Vanessa's been working with Mercer for years, since before you met her. I only found out recently. And yet you helped her, Theo replied coldly. She said it was just about the money, that we'd disappear together after you were discredited. I didn't know about the life insurance until yesterday when Mercer contacted me. Theo leaned forward. What's protocol Widowmaker? Ray's face paled. It's not what you think. It's not about killing you. It's about killing your legacy. Everything you've built. Mercer has access to your company's security infrastructure. They're planning to use it to compromise your highest profile clients. When? 3 days. The annual security conference in Geneva. They're going to demonstrate how to breach your systems during your company's keynote presentation. Theo stood, his decision made. Miguel, book me on the next flight to Zurich. And secure our friend here somewhere comfortable. We're not finished with him. As Theo packed, his phone rang, a video call from an unknown number. He answered to see Vanessa's face, her expression a mixture of confidence and caution. You're more resilient than we anticipated, she said. Impressive. What do you want, Vanessa? To give you a choice. Walk away now. Transfer the company to the holding account we've prepared, sign the divorce papers acknowledging your infidelity and abuse, and disappear. Or stay and fight, and watch everything you've built crumble while facing criminal charges we've carefully constructed. Theo studied her face, this stranger wearing his wife's features. You miscalculated. You should have killed me when you had the chance. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Vanessa's face before she masked it. That was never the plan. I'm not a monster, Theo. No, he agreed coldly. Just a thief and a traitor. But I'm curious, was any of it real? For a moment, Vanessa's composure cracked. Some of it. In the beginning. She recovered quickly. It doesn't matter now. You have 48 hours to decide. After she disconnected, Theo turned to find Miguel watching him with concern. What's the play, boss? Theo's gray eyes were glacial. We're going to Geneva. But first, I need to make a stop at the safety deposit box Vanessa doesn't know about. Chapter 5. Ghosts from the Past. The quiet Swiss village of Meiringen, nestled beneath towering alpine peaks, seemed an unlikely place for confronting ghosts. Theo navigated the narrow streets until he reached a small chalet on the outskirts of town. The elderly man who answered the door recognized him immediately. Herr Blackwall. It has been many years. Too many, Klaus, Theo replied. I need access to the vault. Inside, Klaus led him to a hidden basement room containing a steel door with a biometric lock. The vault beyond held weapons, cash in various currencies, and multiple identity packages. Contingencies Theo had established before he'd ever met Vanessa. But he had come for something specific, a leather-bound journal and a hard drive. I tracked down the information you requested, Klaus said, handing Theo a tablet. The woman you married, she was not who she claimed. The tablet contained a comprehensive dossier on Vanessa Chamberlain. Born Amanda Pierce, orphaned at 16, disappeared from foster care records at 17. She resurfaced 4 years later as Vanessa Chamberlain, complete with fabricated family connections, education credentials, and social history. And her cousin Ray? No relation. He was her handler for the organization. Theo absorbed this revelation with grim validation of his suspicions. What organization? They call themselves the Coterie. They target wealthy individuals, particularly self-made ones without family connections. Their methods are always the same: romantic entanglement, isolation, and eventual financial extraction. How did I miss this? Theo muttered, more to himself than Klaus. The older man's expression softened slightly. Even the most vigilant have blind spots when it comes to matters of the heart. That evening, in his hotel suite overlooking Lake Geneva, Theo reviewed everything he'd learned. The coterie had been targeting him since before he'd met Vanessa. His success and lack of family ties had made him the perfect mark. The revelation explained so much. Vanessa's unexpected appearance in his life, her cousin's convenient friendship, her family's initial resistance that gradually softened, creating the illusion of hard-won acceptance. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Miguel entered with a secure laptop. We've located Mercer and Vanessa, he reported. They're staying at the Remington Hotel under their aliases. The security conference begins tomorrow, and they've registered as attendees. And our other preparations? In place. Your former client from the NSA came through. We have everything you requested. Theo nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow we begin. After Miguel left, Theo opened the leather journal from the vault. It contained details of his life before he became Theodore Blackwell, back when he was Tyler Bishop, a nobody from nowhere with nothing but raw intelligence and survival instincts. He had buried that identity years ago, but perhaps it was time for Tyler Bishop to resurface one last time. As dawn broke over Geneva, Theo activated the first phase of his counterattack. While Vanessa and Mercer believed they were moving invisibly through the city, his team had been tracking their every move, recording their conversations, and mapping their connections. Most importantly, he had identified the third mastermind behind the coterie's Swiss operations, Helvetica Bank Senior Vice President, Leonard Rousseau, who was scheduled to meet Vanessa that afternoon. By noon, Theo had positioned himself in the cafe across from the bank, watching through specialized glasses as Vanessa and Rousseau conversed in his private office. Thanks to the surveillance equipment his team had planted, he could hear every word. The account are prepared, Rousseau was saying. Once the demonstration at the conference exposes the security flaws, his clients will abandon him. The company's stock will plummet, and we'll acquire controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. Vanessa smiled. And the evidence linking him to the security breaches? Already in place. The authorities will be convinced he engineered the vulnerabilities as part of an extortion scheme. Perfect, Vanessa replied, looking genuinely pleased for the first time since Theo had met her. Have you heard from Ray? Rousseau frowned. Nothing. That's concerning. He's probably just being cautious. After Theo escaped, he'd need to lay low. As they continued planning, Theo silently thanked Vanessa for confirming everything he needed to know. The coterie wasn't just after his money. They wanted his company, his reputation, and ultimately, his freedom. What they didn't know was that his company had no security vulnerabilities to expose. The flaws they planned to demonstrate had been planted by Vanessa herself. Backdoors that existed only in a parallel system Theo had created once he suspected betrayal. In his earpiece, Miguel's voice sounded. Facial recognition just flagged another coterie operative entering the bank. Benjamin Foster, the guy who posed as Donovan, the fake cop. Theo watched as Foster was escorted to Rousseau's office. The pieces were falling into place. Now it was time to spring the trap. Chapter 6. The Architect of Revenge. The Grand Geneva Hotel's ballroom buzzed with the technology sector's elite. Security companies, software developers, and government contractors mingled in an atmosphere of collegial competition. At the center of it all stood Blackguard Security's elaborate booth, showcasing their latest innovations, all developed under Theo's leadership. Theo moved through the crowd unnoticed, his appearance subtly altered. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by a nondescript IT specialist with brown hair and glasses. From this vantage point, he observed Vanessa and Mercer circulating, stopping occasionally to speak with targeted individuals, all clients of Blackguard. "They're laying groundwork," Miguel murmured through the earpiece, "creating doubt about our systems before the demonstration." "Let them," Theo replied softly. "Is everything in place?" "Yes. The real presentation is ready to go once you give a signal." Theo checked his watch. 2 hours until the scheduled keynote, where Mercer planned to demonstrate Blackguard's vulnerabilities to the assembled crowd. Little did they know, Theo had already met privately with his most important clients, warning them of a planned penetration test demonstration and securing their cooperation. He slipped away to a private room where the final pieces of his plan awaited. On multiple screens, he could see various coterie members arriving at the conference, more than he'd initially suspected. The organization was committing significant resources to this operation. A quiet knock preceded the entrance of a silver-haired woman in an impeccable suit. "Mr. Blackwell, or should I say Mr. Bishop?" "Director Walsh," Theo acknowledged. "Thank you for coming." Isabella Walsh, Deputy Director of Financial Crimes at Interpol, had been skeptical when Theo first contacted her. Now, looking at the evidence he'd compiled on the coterie's operations across 3 continents, her skepticism had transformed into determined focus. "You've given us enough to take down their entire European network," she said. "But are you certain about doing it this way? We could arrest them now." "No." Theo's voice was resolute. "I need them to activate their plan publicly. Only then will we have irrefutable evidence of their methods and reach." Walsh nodded reluctantly. "My team is in position. Just give the signal when you're ready." As she left, Theo turned to the final screen, a live feed from a secure facility where Ray Palmer sat in an interrogation room, looking increasingly desperate as he recorded his full confession about the coterie's operations, his role in them, and their plans for Theo. "It's time," Theo said to Miguel. "Let's give them the demonstration they're expecting." The ballroom lights dimmed as Theo's COO, Daniel Freeman, took the stage for Blackguard's keynote presentation. In the audience, Vanessa and Mercer sat with anticipatory smiles, surrounded by the company's most valuable clients. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, "today we are thrilled to demonstrate Blackguard's newest security protocol, one that represents a revolutionary approach to threat detection." As he continued, Mercer slipped away to a backstage area where he'd planted equipment to hijack the presentation. Right on schedule, the main screen flickered, and what appeared to be Blackguard's client database appeared, complete with access codes and security vulnerabilities. Gasps spread through the audience as sensitive information from major corporations and government agencies seemingly became visible. Mercer returned to his seat, exchanging a triumphant glance with Vanessa. Then, abruptly, the screen changed. Ray Palmer's face appeared, his expression haunted. "My name is Raymond Palmer," he began. "For the past 5 years, I've been part of a criminal organization known as the Coterie. What you are witnessing is not a security breach, but a carefully orchestrated fraud designed to destroy Blackguard Security and its founder, Theodore Blackwell. The screen split to show surveillance footage of Vanessa, Mercer, and various coterie members planning the operation. Their detailed conversations about fabricating evidence, creating false identities, and embezzling funds played for the stunned audience. In her seat, Vanessa froze, her face draining of color as her own voice echoed through the ballroom. Once we've destroyed his reputation, transferring the company assets will be simple. He'll be too busy fighting criminal charges to stop us. Before Mercer could reach for what s0n knew was a concealed weapon, Interpol agents moved in, surrounding them. Throughout the ballroom, other coterie members found themselves similarly contained. Director Walsh approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. I am Deputy Director Walsh from Interpol. What you're witnessing is the culmination of a multi-year investigation into a criminal enterprise specializing in identity fraud, extortion, and financial crimes." As the agents led Vanessa past him, she finally noticed s0n in his disguise. Their eyes met, and her shock turned to bitter understanding. "It was all a trap," she said, her voice barely audible. s0n removed his glasses. "No," he corrected her coldly. "It was justice." Chapter 7. The Unraveling Web. 3 months after the Geneva conference, s0n sat in his attorney's office reviewing the latest developments. The coterie investigation had expanded dramatically, uncovering operations in 12 countries and identifying over 30 victims of their elaborate schemes. The prosecution has offered Vanessa a deal, Howard Phillips, his silver-haired attorney, explained. 20 years instead of life, if she provides details on all coterie operations. "Has she taken it?" s0n asked, his voice neutral. "Not yet. She's asking to speak with you first." s0n considered this. "Arrange it." 2 days later, he sat across from Vanessa in a sterile prison meeting room. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a standard jumpsuit, her carefully maintained appearance now stripped of artifice. Yet she still carried herself with the poise that had once captivated him. "You've been busy," she said, gesturing to the file of newspaper clippings she'd been collecting about the coteries unraveling. "Congratulations on the government contracts. Your company's stock has doubled since the arrest." "I didn't come to discuss business," s0n replied. "You wanted to see me." Vanessa leaned forward. "I wanted you to know that not everything was a lie. There were moments, real moments, between us." s0n's expression remained impassive. "Is that supposed to matter now?" "No," she admitted. "But before I give them everything, I thought you deserved to know the truth. I wasn't supposed to marry you. The original plan was a shorter con. Get close, extract funds, disappear. I changed the plan." "Why?" A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Because I recognized something in you that reminded me of myself. That drive to reinvent yourself, to bury the past, and create something new." s0n studied her, seeing past the practiced manipulation to the kernel of truth beneath. "You had choices, Vanessa. Or Amanda. Or whatever your real name is." "Elise," she said softly. "Elise Novak. That's who I was born." "Well, Elise, your choices led you here. Mine led me to survive you." She nodded slowly. "There's one more thing you should know. The coterie doesn't forgive failure. They'll keep coming for you. Through me. Through others. As long as you have what they want. And what is that? The only thing they truly value. The ability to disappear and start again. Your contingency protocols, your identity packages, your escape networks. The things that made you impossible to truly con." s0n stood to leave. "Consider this my final gift to Vanessa, the woman I thought I married. Take the deal. Whoever's left of the coterie can't protect you anymore." As he reached the door, she called out, "The morning after our wedding, when you brought me coffee in bed and we talked about building a home together, that was real. I meant every word." s0n paused, not turning back. "So did I." Outside the prison, Miguel waited with updates on their ongoing operation to dismantle what remained of the coterie. While Interpol had captured many members, the shadowy leadership remained elusive. "We identified another potential victim," Miguel reported as they drove back to s0n's hotel. "Andrew Carstairs, tech entrepreneur in Boston. The coterie operative posing as his fiancée matches the description of a woman who visited Vanessa last week, posing as her sister. They're already regrouping, Theo mused. Faster than expected. What's our next move? Theo stared out the window at the passing cityscape. We warn him. Then we follow the trail back to their leadership. Over the next weeks, Theo transformed his security company into something new. While maintaining its legitimate business, he created a specialized division focused on identifying and preventing long-con operations. Using his understanding of the coteries' methods, he developed protocols to recognize their patterns and protect potential victims. Andrew Carstairs had been skeptical when Theo approached him with evidence about his fiancée, Sophia. But when confronted with proof, Sophia had fled, taking with her access codes to Carstairs' developmental technology and prototype designs worth millions. How did you know? Carstairs had asked Theo afterward, his expression haunted by the betrayal. Because I lived it, Theo had answered simply. Now, tracking Sophia had led them to an unexpected discovery, a training facility in rural Montana where the coterie prepared their operatives. Under the guise of an exclusive finishing school called the Artemis Academy, young women with troubled pasts were being molded into sophisticated con artists. We've identified the headmistress, Miguel reported, showing Theo surveillance photos of an elegant older woman. Diane Winters, 72, supposedly retired from a career in international banking. In reality, she's been running the coterie's North American operations for decades. Theo studied the woman's aristocratic features. She looks familiar. She should, Miguel replied grimly. We found her in Vanessa's background. Diane Winters was the foster mother who took in Amanda Pierce, the girl who became your wife. The pieces clicked into place. Vanessa hadn't been recruited by the coterie. She had been raised by them, groomed from adolescence for exactly the kind of operation she'd run on Theo. We have enough for the FBI to raid the academy, Miguel continued. But that would only capture the training operation, not the leadership behind it. Theo's expression hardened with resolve. Then we need to make Diane Winters lead us to them. Chapter 8. The Deadly Game. The Artemis Academy sprawled across 50 acres of Montana wilderness, its elegant buildings belying its true purpose. From his vantage point on a neighboring ridge, Theo observed the comings and goings through high-powered binoculars. Security is tighter than it appears, Miguel noted, pointing out disguised camera positions and patrol patterns. These aren't just rent-a-cops. They're using military formations. Makes sense, Theo replied. They're protecting their most valuable asset, the next generation of operatives. Their surveillance had revealed 23 young women in residence, ranging from teenagers to women in their early 20s. Each day followed a rigorous schedule of physical training, language studies, social engineering exercises, and what appeared to be psychological conditioning. It's like watching a finishing school for spies, Miguel had commented during their first day of observation. That's exactly what it is, Theo had responded grimly. Now, after a week of surveillance, they had identified a vulnerability. Diane Winters left the compound every Sunday to attend church in the nearby town, accompanied by only 2 security personnel. We're not actually going to abduct her from a church, are we? Miguel asked, concern evident in his voice. No, Theo assured him. We're going to make her come to us. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using information gathered from Vanessa's reluctant cooperation, they had identified Winters' one weakness, her biological son, Thomas, whom she had placed with an adoptive family 40 years earlier while establishing her coterie identity. He had grown up unaware of his mother's true occupation, believing her to be a distant aunt who occasionally sent birthday cards. Now an accounting professor in Minneapolis, Thomas Hunter was about to receive an unexpected inheritance, and with it, the attention of the coterie. The fabricated documents arrived at Hunter's office by courier, a letter from a fictional law firm informing him of a substantial inheritance from a previously unknown relative, along with details suggesting this relative had connections to Diane Winters. Just enough information to pique curiosity, not enough to reveal the trap. As expected, Hunter began researching his supposed benefactor. Also as expected, the coterie surveillance detected this activity. Within 3 days, Diane Winters had arranged an accidental meeting with Hunter at a Minneapolis cafe. What she couldn't know was that every word of their conversation was being recorded by the sophisticated equipment Theo had provided to Hunter beforehand, after approaching him with the truth about his mother. "I've spent my life wondering about my birth parents," Hunter had told Theo when presented with the evidence. "Finding out my mother is essentially a criminal mastermind wasn't exactly what I imagined." Now, as Winters attempted to establish rapport with her son while subtly probing for information about his sudden inheritance, Hunter played his role perfectly. Curious, slightly naive, but not suspicious. "I'm just surprised," he told her during their second meeting. "The documents mention assets in the Cayman Islands. I'm not even sure how to access those." Winter's expression betrayed nothing, but her pulse, monitored by thermal imaging from Theo's team across the street, quickened. "I might know someone who could help you navigate that," she offered casually. 3 days later, Hunter was on a private jet to Grand Cayman, ostensibly to meet with financial advisors arranged by his helpful aunt. In reality, he was being delivered directly to the coteries' inner circle, exactly as Theo had planned. "He's in," Miguel confirmed as they monitored Hunter's tracking devices from their hotel suite in Georgetown. "The meeting is set for tomorrow at the Serenity Cove Resort. Private bungalows, restricted access." Theo nodded. "Alert the tactical team, and make sure our friend in room 212 is comfortable." Room 212 held Leonard Rousseau, the banker who had worked with Vanessa in Geneva. After his arrest, facing multiple life sentences, he had proven surprisingly willing to cooperate in exchange for considerations at sentencing. His knowledge of the coteries' financial operations had been the key to identifying their leadership structure. "There are 7 of them," Rousseau had explained. "The founders, they call themselves. Most have never met in person. They communicate through encrypted channels and proxies. But once a year, they gather to distribute profits and assign new targets." Now, lured by the prospect of a significant new asset, Hunter's supposed inheritance, actually a sophisticated financial trap designed by Theo, 5 of the 7 founders had traveled to Grand Cayman for an unscheduled meeting. The next evening, as Hunter sat nervously in a luxurious bungalow surrounded by the coteries' leadership, Theo's operation reached its culmination. While Interpol agents positioned themselves around the resort, Theo monitored the proceedings through Hunter's concealed equipment. "Mr. Hunter," began an elegant man in his 60s who had introduced himself as Julian Clark, "we're very interested in helping you manage this unexpected windfall. But first, we need to understand exactly what you've inherited." As Hunter began sharing the fabricated details, Theo gave the signal. Simultaneously, Interpol teams moved in on the bungalow and on locations in 7 countries where the coteries' digital operations were headquartered. The raid was swift and precise. Within minutes, 5 of the coteries' 7 founders were in custody, along with terabytes of incriminating data and financial records detailing decades of criminal operations. In the aftermath, as Hunter was safely extracted and the arrested founders processed, Director Walsh approached Theo on the resort's deserted beach. "Congratulations," she said. "You've just helped us dismantle one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises we've ever encountered." Theo watched the waves, his expression unreadable. "Not quite. 2 founders are still out there." Walsh nodded. "We'll find them." "No," Theo said with quiet certainty. "I will." Chapter 9. Ashes of Betrayal. 6 months later, Theo stood on the observation deck of a Chicago penthouse, watching snow fall over the city. The final pieces of his vengeance had fallen into place with a precision that would have been beautiful if it weren't so devastating. The missing coterie founders had been more elusive than anticipated. 1. A reclusive technology magnate named Victor Kane had been tracked to his compound in New Zealand, where local authorities had found him dead from an apparent suicide, though Theo suspected a more sinister explanation. The 7th and final founder had proven most difficult to identify. Unlike the others, this person operated completely in shadow, known only by the codename Genesis. While Interpol pursued conventional investigation methods, Theo had taken a different approach. Using the psychological profiles he developed of the coteries' leadership and the patterns he'd observed in their operations, He had constructed a prediction model of where Genesis might surface next. The model had led him to an unexpected conclusion, one that had seemed impossible until he'd found the evidence hidden in encrypted files from Diane Winter's personal server. His phone buzzed with a text from Miguel, package delivered, en route to rendezvous. Theo took one last look at the city before heading to the helipad where his private helicopter waited. The journey to the remote lake house took less than an hour. Inside the rustic but luxurious cabin, a fire crackled in the stone hearth. Miguel stood guard over a bound figure in one of the leather armchairs, an elderly man with sharp features and calculating eyes. "Mr. Blackwell," the man acknowledged with a slight nod. "I was wondering when you'd find me." "Harold Chamberlain," Theo replied, taking the seat opposite him. "Or should I call you Genesis?" The man who had presented himself to the world as Vanessa's father smiled thinly. "I've had many names over the years. That one served its purpose, creating a fictional family for Amanda Pierce to inhabit when she became Vanessa, giving her the credibility she needed to get close to me." Among other things, Chamberlain agreed. "You've been quite thorough in dismantling my organization. I suppose congratulations are in order." Theo studied the man who had orchestrated so much destruction. "Why me? There are wealthier targets, easier marks." Chamberlain's eyes gleamed with something like respect. "You were never the primary target, Mr. Blackwell. Or should I say, Mr. Bishop?" The use of his original name, a name he had buried decades ago, sent a chill through Theo. "Your security protocols," Chamberlain continued. "Your contingency plans. Your ability to create and discard identities at will. These were always the true prize. The Coterie has been trying to acquire your methods since you first appeared on our radar 15 years ago. So Vanessa was our most promising operative, the only one we believed could get close enough to learn your secrets." A shadow of what might have been regret crossed his features. "I didn't anticipate that she would develop genuine feelings for you. It compromised her effectiveness." Theo absorbed this revelation with cold clarity. "And now," Chamberlain regarded him with professional assessment, "now you have a choice. The Coterie is finished, you've seen to that. But there will always be demand for what we provided. You could rebuild it, improve it, with your security knowledge and my networks." "You're proposing a partnership," Theo stated flatly. "I'm offering evolution," Chamberlain corrected. "You've proven yourself more capable than anyone who's ever come against us. Together, we could create something unprecedented." For a moment, Theo allowed himself to consider the possibility. The power it would bring, the resources, the ability to operate beyond conventional boundaries. Then he thought of the lives destroyed by the Coterie's operations, the calculated cruelty of their methods. "I already have something unprecedented," Theo said finally, standing. "It's called integrity." He nodded to Miguel, who moved forward with zip ties. "What happens now?" Chamberlain asked, his composure finally slipping. "Now, justice happens," Theo replied. "The complete server records from your New Zealand compound have been delivered to Interpol. They'll find evidence linking you to operations going back 30 years. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison." As Miguel secured Chamberlain, Theo's phone rang, a call he'd been expecting. "Mr. Blackwell," Director Walsh's voice came through clearly. "We received your package. The evidence is overwhelming. We're moving on the locations you identified. And the special consideration I requested? Granted, though I don't understand why you want her transferred to a minimum security facility after everything she did." Theo glanced at Chamberlain, the man who had raised Vanessa from childhood to become a weapon. She was as much a victim as a perpetrator. Sometimes the lines between predator and prey aren't as clear as we'd like them to be. After ending the call, Theo watched as Miguel escorted Chamberlain to the waiting authorities. The final architect of his personal hell was now facing his own reckoning. Later that night, back in his Chicago penthouse, Theo opened the safe hidden behind a painting in his office. Inside was a single envelope containing divorce papers Vanessa had signed from prison. Beneath her signature was a handwritten note. "I know you'll never forgive me. I wouldn't deserve it if you did. But know this, in a life built on lies, you are the one truth I wish